Hello to everyone who's joining us. We'll get started here probably at just a minute after the hour. And if you're having any technical issues, feel free to put them in the chat. No guarantee that we can solve them, but we can definitely troubleshoot together. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the UCGIS 2021-2022 webinar series. My name is Jennifer Bernstein. I'm a lecturer at the University of Southern California in the Spatial Sciences Institute. And just before we jump in, I want to remind you that on this platform, in this webinar space, everyone will be in listen-only mode. However, we strongly encourage you to type questions into the question space. And once our presenters are finished presenting, we will get to as many of those as we can. You're also free to raise your hand throughout the webinar should anything come up that is just a burning question that won't quit. So we are lucky enough today to have Shilong Law and Daniel Sway, who are presenting what I think is just a fascinating topic. They define it as integrating space and place to better understand the new human dynamics, GIScience, geography, and beyond. And when I was looking over their slides this week, I was impressed with the ambitiousness of their topic and intent to sort of engage in fields that sometimes maybe don't talk to each other so well. So with that, I will be here moderating questions, but I would like to give up the screen share to Dr. Shaw and Dr. Sway, and you can take it away. We'll probably have about 45 minutes of a presentation and then 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Jen, for hosting this webinar. I'm Suren Shaw at the University of Tennessee, a geographer and a GIS scientist. Also, I'm the president-elect of UCGIS. So, Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And I'm Dan Sway. I'm a professor of geography and public international affairs. I'm a big supporter of UCGIS.
Good. So I will start our presentation. We are very pleased to have this opportunity of sharing our work on a Spaceplace GIScience framework for human dynamics research based on a paper we published in the Annals of the AAG last year. So I will take some time to present the framework we have, and then I will pass it on to Dan, and Dan is going to talk about the outlook and next steps of this framework. Okay, I'm going to start with a question for our presentation. So if we think about the GIS that we have been using for several decades now, how have we handled humans in GIS and the GIS science? Okay, so probably you can guess that the answer from Dan and myself is we probably have not paid sufficient attention to humans when we work on GIS and GIS science. So a quick background. Max Eigenhofer and David Mark, back then, more than 25 years ago, they suggested that naive geography can capture and reflect the way people think and reason about geographic space and time. They also argue that naive geography can be the basis for the design of intelligent GIS that will act and respond as a person would. But if we look at GIS we are working with today, we are still probably far away from what Max and David envisioned more than 25 years ago. So that's not very surprising because conventional GIS have followed the traditional cartographic approach of representing locations in physical space as static map layers, like the diagram shows here. And this approach is very much based on Newton's concept of absolute space. And we have been using Euclidean geometry and the Cartesian coordinate system to implement conventional GIS. So we would like to argue that this particular conceptualization of space as Newton's concept of absolute space has some major limitations when we need to consider humans in GIS. So first, let me spend a few minutes to talk about what we have in mind in terms of human dynamics. We as human beings have different kinds of needs that we need to fulfill in our daily lives. So the diagram on the right-hand side shows an example of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. So we all have basic needs such that we have to sleep, we have to eat. Also, we need to feel safe. We need to have friends, to fulfill our different needs. Okay? And the human dynamics here refer to all kinds of human activities and interactions, whether in physical space or in virtual space, is critical to fulfilling our different needs in a space and a time context. So we need to keep in mind that humans are not static. We are dynamic and living entities. We constantly move between different locations over time in order to fulfill the different needs through our activities and the interactions. And also today, we live in a so-called smart, connected, mobile, and dynamic world. And these modern information and communication technologies, ICTs, have significantly changed human dynamics in both physical and virtual worlds. And in physical space, we have been using different kinds of transportation to move between different locations. And in virtual space, we are using ICT tools to navigate from one virtual place to another virtual place. For example, from one Facebook page to another Facebook page, to Amazon page, to Twitter, and to Zoom, okay? And we also need to keep in mind that whatever happens in physical space are not independent from what happens in virtual space. They influence and interact with each other. In fact, they are entangled together. So this kind of hybrid physical virtual world has brought up some new challenges, okay, to many research problems we are dealing with, including what we face in GIS science. So now if we ask, what is the location of Google or Amazon or Twitter in GIS? What would be your answer? Okay, sorry, through Zoom, I cannot see all the audience and interact with everyone. But if we take the location of Google as example, the location of Google certainly could be represented by the XY coordinates of its headquarters in Mountain View, California, in absolute space, like what we have been doing in conventional GIS. But we also could use the URLs of Google websites in virtual space to represent Google. And we know the URLs for Google are different in different countries. We certainly also can use IP addresses of Google servers. Or we simply use Google as an identity. So there are multiple ways to represent Google in this physical virtual world. So our next question is the conventional absolute space approach sufficient to support human dynamics research in today's increasingly hybrid physical virtual world? That's why we have proposed this Spaceplace GIScience framework, because our answer, as you can guess, is probably no. Okay, so in this Spaceplace, or we call it Spatial GIScience framework for human dynamics research, instead of having locations as the center in conventional GIS, we put humans at the center of this framework. And we treat humans as dynamic objects. And in terms of all kinds of activities and the interactions that humans do, we bring in 4 concepts of space: absolute space, relative space, relational space, and the mental space, as well as 4 concepts of place: location, locale, place identity, and sense of place. And put all of them into this framework. And the outer circle on the diagram indicates that these different concepts of space and place, they are not independent from each other. They are actually linked with each other and interacting with each other or entangled with each other. So next, let me explain these concepts and this framework. So absolute space, this is the foundation of conventional GIS that serves many useful applications. We are not arguing that conventional GIS is no longer useful. In fact, conventional GIS will continue to be important and continue to be very useful for many applications. Okay, but locations in absolute space, we argue, probably will not be sufficient to handle what we need to deal with in today's world. So how about relative space? If we think about indoor navigation, which is a popular topic now, how many of us use XYZ coordinates in absolute space related to the concept of location and site to navigate inside a building? Probably not too many of us. And in this case, relative locations and the surrounding environment related to the concept of locale, situation, and context may be more intuitive to human beings. Okay? Another example about relative space is autonomous vehicles, which also have received a lot of attention today. So if we ask, what is the positional accuracy of GIS databases required to support operation of autonomous vehicles? What would be your answer? Okay, we know the standard GPS-based in-vehicle navigation system we have been using, they can be accurate on average about 10 to 15 meters. But for autonomous vehicles, at the minimum, we need to be accurate to individual traffic lanes. That means 3 to 5 meters positional accuracy. But how about parking, especially in big cities? Okay, we are talking about probably 5 to 10 centimeter positional accuracy. So the question is it feasible to build a global GIS database at a positional accuracy level of 5 to 10 centimeters? The answer is probably yes, technologies are there, but it can be very time consuming and costly. And also, how often can we update that database at this level of positional accuracy? Even though we can update it on a daily basis, but there are moving vehicles, moving pedestrians, moving bicycles constantly out there. So in this case, locations in absolute space that have been used in conventional GIS will not be sufficient to support operation of autonomous vehicles. But in the meantime, we all know that these autonomous vehicles are equipped with all kinds of sensors which can be accurate to sub-centimeter level. So if we can integrate absolute locations with relative locations of the surrounding environment collected by these sensors, then the challenge can be easily addressed. So that's the kind of advantages of integrating these different concepts of space together. And also, we have been in this COVID-19 pandemic for a while. And contact tracing has been used as a common tool to try to control the spread of COVID-19 virus. So in earlier days, GPS-based contact tracing were used, but that raised a lot of privacy concerns. So later on, Google and Apple teamed up to develop an app based on Bluetooth technology. So what's the key difference between GPS and Bluetooth? GPS is based on absolute locations, and the Bluetooth is based on relative locations. So in this case, relative space also can have other benefits, such as protecting privacy, at least to a certain degree. Okay, next, relational space. So many of us have been working on that online social media, social network data. And also many of us have been doing online shopping, especially during the pandemic. Now we are all connected through Zoom. These are all examples of relational space. In a relational space, the focus is on topological relations and the individual identity or place identity rather than absolute locations. And these relations can exist either in physical space or virtual space, like our social networks. So this is one work we did more than 10 years ago. We developed an extension on top of a commercial GIS software to try to integrate the concepts of absolute space and relative space. So this is based on the time geography approach. So each line you see here represents a space-time path or trajectory of a person across space over time. And the red lines, they are the space-time paths for people. And the blue lines, they are the space-time for virtual entities such as Facebook, Amazon, Zoom. And the gray lines, they are for physical entities such as a restaurant, a library. If you see a gap on a gray line, that means that particular facility was closed during that time period. And when you see, for example, multiple red lines with a blue line, that means those people, they were interacting with each other through a virtual entity, such as Zoom, like the Zoom webinar we have now. So this helps us integrate the locations and the data in both absolute space and the relational space. Next, mental space. Here, the focus is on the mental and the cognitive aspects of humans. And I did a search of Chinatown in New York City using Google Maps. And the Google Maps returned the boundary line of Chinatown in New York City for me. At the same time, I also did an identical search of Chinatown in New York City using OpenStreetMap. Again, it returns the boundary of the Chinatown in New York City. But their boundaries are different. So which one is correct? We really don't know because there is no official boundary line for Chinatown in New York City. It is perceived by people and it evolves over time. So that reflects the importance of mental space there. And let's get back to autonomous vehicle as example for mental space here. So for example, one day you are trying to cross a street and the car stopped with engine running. Suddenly you realized in the red rectangle here, the driver is sleeping. So how many of you would feel comfortable to cross the street in front of this stopped car with running engine? And the Stanford University did an experiment. Many people walked behind the vehicle to cross the street. That's because in our daily life, we would have used our eye contact with the driver to make sure the driver sees us and we can cross the street in front of the car safely. But in this case, the driver is sleeping. So how can we address this kind of challenge? Relatively easy. all we need is to have the autonomous vehicle, for example, to flash light and indicating I see you, you can cross the street in front of me safely, okay? So from the mental space perspective, this kind of autonomous vehicle human communications interactions can be important, okay? Another example related to autonomous vehicles is we often run into construction zones with a construction worker holding a stop sign, okay? But there could be some interesting scenarios we can create in autonomous vehicle era. So for example, now I recruit 100 students and I give each of them a free t-shirt with a big stop sign printed on the front and the back of the t-shirt. Then I send them to walk around the streets in the city, okay? What could happen, okay? It probably could crash the traffic, okay, in the city. So, you know, in order to support different kinds of applications, these examples indicate the importance of considering mental space too. So let me try to recap these 4 types of space. Absolute space works with absolute locations in space, and it focuses on questions such as where are the different objects like the conventional GIS have been doing. And the relative space works with relative locations to a fixed or moving object and focuses on questions such as what are around us. In conventional GIS, some functions are related to relative space. And the relational space works with relations to other objects and focuses on questions such as what are related to us. And the mental space works with cognitive and mental aspects of space and focuses on questions such as what do people have in mind. So that's those 4 concepts of space. Now let's switch to the concepts of place. If twine indicates that place is an area in a space that humans have given meaning to it. So for example, a particular XY coordinate, okay, probably has not changed for hundreds of years, but that place already evolved, okay, into very different places over time, okay? So place is a social construction that is unique to different people and varies over time. Paul Adams also indicates that there are 3 meta approaches that could be parsed as place as location, place as experience, and place as contested terrain. Many of you probably can guess what these 3 meta approaches are. So for example, place as location probably is closely related to the traditional spatial analysis approach. Place as experience is closely related to Eve Twine's humanistic approach. And the place as contested terrain probably is better aligned with critical approach, okay? Which of these approaches is better, okay? Probably all of them have their importance, okay? And Paul Adams argues that the essence of place is its ability to synthesize multiple characteristics of those places. And our framework also tries to emphasize the importance of integrating these different concepts and approaches together. So Paul Adams also suggests that academic thought constructs very precise ways of defining places, but only by grossly simplifying place, either to just locations such as in the natural sciences or in conventional GIS, to social categories and hierarchies like in social sciences, or as a type of experience like what people do in the humanities, okay? So how can we integrate these different concepts of space and concepts of place? John Agnew points out 3 major dimensions for the concept of place. First is location, which refers to a site in space where an activity or object is located. And this can be easily defined by XY coordinates, like what we have been doing in conventional GIS. Second is locale, which refers to settings where everyday life activities take place. So this can be defined by both physical, environmental, and the socio-economic, cultural context, the surrounding environments. And the sense of place, which indicates identification with a place as a unique community, landscape, and moral order. So this can be defined by human subjective perception or attachment to a particular location or locale. So to integrate these different concepts of space and the concepts of place together in our framework, here is what we did. So first, absolute space in our framework is associated with the concept of location that suggests a specific position or site that can be conveniently represented by XY coordinates or XYZ coordinates based on the concepts of absolute space. And the concept locale is closely related to the concept of relative space. In other words, our attention now focuses mainly on the situation rather than the site of an object. And when we deal with relational space, the focus shifts to place identity, like in our Facebook social network, okay? The relations are more important than the absolute locations, and the individual identity is critical, okay, in a social network or in a relational space. Finally, mental space is associated with sense of place. We attempt to reflect what people have in mind about a location, a locale, or a place identity that are associated with these different concepts of place. Okay, so to summarize, that is our Spaceplace GIScience framework with humans at the center, and integrates the four concepts of absolute space, relative space, relational space, mental space, and the four concepts of place, location, locale, place, identity, and sense of place. And because of time limit, we are not going to have sufficient time to talk about how they are related or can be implemented. But Dan is going to share with you some very interesting idea about outlook and next steps, which we are looking at this moment. So Dan, please take over. I will advance the slides for you.
Thank you, Shilong. That's an excellent overview of the framework. Next slide. Yeah, as Shilong mentioned in his excellent overview, that this framework is based on the paper we published back in the annals of AAG back in 2018. To our pleasant surprise, after the publication of this paper, we have received quite a few requests and questions and comments from our colleagues. And before I talk about what's the outlook, what's the next step, one of the frequent questions that we asked is what are the implementation or application examples? So as Shilong mentioned, due to the time constraint, we don't have time to talk about the implementation issues. But in terms of applications, I can quickly mention two potential application examples, again, at a very high level for you to think about, and then I will share with you my thoughts of what are some of the possible next steps for this framework. Next slide. So for, in terms of applications, since we are still in the middle of an ongoing pandemic, so after Shilong and I published the paper, we worked with a group of contributors from 12 different countries scattered in 3 different continents. So we finished this book, Mapping COVID-19, Understanding the Spatial and Temporal Dimensions of this Global Pandemic. So again, in a nutshell, one I want to encourage all of you to think about the ongoing pandemic through the framework, the spatial framework Shulong just presented. So obviously, you know, in order to understand the pandemic, we have to understand where it is, where is its origin. So that's the question, you know, related to the absolute space. But if you want to understand the spread of the virus, you have to think about in terms of the relational space. You know, how people travel. You know, or with whom the people at the different locations are interacting with. But also we have to consider, in addition to all these you know, legit information people put out there, we also have to consider all this misinformation people posted in social media and so forth. So that's all the mental perception and the relational relative relational space coming together. So next slide, keep clicking. Yeah, so in the final chapter, we have outlined all these challenges facing, you know, those challenges that using this framework that might help us better understand in a holistic way what's going on related to this pandemic. The second topic I would like to encourage you to think about to apply this framework is to think about the future of work. Right after this seminar, I'm going to go to my class. I'm teaching an honors course at Virginia Tech on the future of work. Again, there's multiple dimensions. Next slide, please. One example I talked about recently in my class is this emerging phenomenon called the digital nomads. So basically, there is a group of people combining work with tourism in different locations. So here are the top 15 countries that are the top destinations for people, for the digital nomads to do their work, but also combine it with fun. And here's are the top 20 places for digital nomads. But if you think about how this could possibly work, apparently, if you want to understand the human dynamics involved in this new kind of work performed by digital nomads, apparently at the conceptual level, you have to think it through the lens of the 4 spaces Shulong just talked about, in terms, because it involves both absolute location, as this lady laying on the beach with her laptop, but she's connected through social media, through the virtual world with lots of other people in other places. So to analyze the future work like the performed by digital nomads, I don't know how you can do it without synthesizing, you know, all these 4 different spaces. Also, in terms of its integration with the concept of the different dimensions of places. So these are the 2 examples I would, in terms of applications, and think about some of the key issues facing humanity today. Now, so let me just share with you briefly what's so special about this new framework. Next slide. So in a nutshell, what we are proposing, in case you missed the big picture, I want to emphasize that the spatial framework actually coincides with the quantum turn that I recently write about for GIS, for both as a technology and as a GI science. So conceptually speaking, the spatial framework by integrating space and the place is conceptually, it is consistent with the quantum term that I'm calling for GIS science. Next slide. So I think when I talk about the quantum term in GIS science, generally there are three dimensions. The methodological dimension that as a new way of doing spatial analysis and modeling, relying on the cutting edge quantum computing technology. So that's one dimension. The second dimension is related to the theoretical conceptual reckoning that is really linking all the disparaging concepts that we have developed. And our spatial framework integrating space and place, conceptually speaking, is a new framework pretty much in line with quantum thinking. Last but not least, the third dimension in the quantum term in GIS science is related to the new ethics, new practices and actions that guide our policies. Next slide. So again, without belaboring too much into the details, in terms of at the conceptual level, I think there are four very important quantum concepts that could be very helpful for you to understand the framework we are presenting. One is these four concepts are related to entanglement, or also known as non-locality or spooky action at a distance, complementarity, which is holistic thinking that transcends the binary demarcation of the world, of our conceptualization of the world. Superposition is related to potentiality, and also non-deterministic in terms of dealing with uncertainty. Next slide. So in terms of geography or GIS science engagement with quantum concept itself is not new. I recall that when shortly after I finished graduate school, I read this paper by Bill Peterson in the PG on quantum theory and geography. What can Dr. Bertelmann teach us? You know, that was in the early 1990s, but to everybody's pleasant surprise, although the calls for the quantum term in geography has been with us for a while, but if you look at the literature, those early calls in the 1990s have not generated enough followings. But things are changing very rapidly because of the new advances in quantum computing. Next slide. So the new quantum computing, because right now GIS is built on a technology that is based upon a binary Neumann scheme based on 0 and 1. The beauty of quantum computing is built upon a qubit, which is covers by superimposing overlay of the different states between 0 and 1. We can do computing at far more effectively. So this is a really game changer in terms of computing technology as we know it. So moving forward, if you ask me to bet what would be the next disruptive technology for GIS or spatial data handling, I think in the near future, probably we should pay close attention to quantum computing. I think that's why we have this international global computation in terms of which country should claim the quantum supremacy. in the United States, I know all major companies, IBM, Google, are heavily involved in developing the next generation of quantum computer. Next, great. So I want to leave you, with this new emerging sort of life form as we move into this new post-pandemic world. If you think about it more broadly, so we are increasingly conducting our life in this metaverse, which is a science fiction term Neil Stephenson created in this science fiction Snow Crash, but it has become a new computational platform that is seamlessly integrating the mirror world. The traditional geospatial world, as reflected in GIS and the remote sensing, GPS stuff, are mirror world that we try to measure the reality. Of course, one of the latest development related to the mirror world is digital twins technology. And then another component for this metaverse is a virtual world. That's the imagined world. Then life logging, that's the social media world, and then augmented reality, the different elements of the reality captured by the digital technology. So moving forward, I think humanity will increasingly conducting our lives, different aspects of our lives in the metaverse by seamlessly integrating, these four different aspects of the metaverse. So our framework, by integrating space and the place through the spatial framework, are in a way trying to capture the different elements of this metaverse. Next slide. So just this year, earlier this year, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced that the next step for Facebook and the social network computing is to get into the metaverse stuff. So Zuckerberg himself even characterized that the Facebook is really in the next couple of years should become a metaverse company. And my interpretation of that vision is really he's trying to seamlessly integrating the mirror world, the virtual world, and augmented reality, in addition to the traditional, social media world, the life logging that Facebook has been managing. So I think our framework is developed, should be viewed in that context in order to position ourselves under the GIS science community for this new computing environment and the platform. Next slide. So as a quick summary, we have 4 take-home points. Is first, this human-centric space-place GIS science framework is more intuitive and natural to human being, which can serve as the basis for the design of a next generation, more intelligent GIS. Next. This framework can also make GIS science more relevant and useful for human geographers and researchers and the researchers in humanities and social science. And this framework conceptually is consistent with the emerging quantum turn in GIS science, and also congruent practically with the emerging metaverse pursued by industry. Next. So to make this framework implemented and applied more widely, it will take a great teamwork. So we would like to have more conversations with you all, and we can work together to move this interesting framework forward. and we will welcome you all join the effort. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our presenters. This was great. I really love the way in which this presentation connected some very sort of historical foundational aspects of geography and spatial analysis and said, well, how have these changed? So I've put it's open access right now. So I put the panel in the link to the article in the chat if anyone would like to see the article that our panelists were presenting on. And we have a number of great questions. And so I think the way that I'm going to prioritize, given that we have 15 minutes, is that if two or more people asked about a particular topic, we can go with that. And I'm sure that Dr. Shah and Dr. Sui will be available at other times and in other ways to be able to engage on the questions that we don't get to. So I apologize in advance for not being able to get to everything that we want to. I would say one of the questions that came up a couple times, and forgive me if I'm butchering your intentions here, but was about application, especially in terms of visualization. If we're looking at space and engagement with space in more of a relational way, how do you visualize this information given how different your approach is than what's traditionally done? So this was in the context, for example, one participant said they live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it has a large international airport, which magnifies access to other places. So CLT is closer to London than to Portland, Maine. But how do you bring in that relationship and visualize it? And then another respondent was interested in the 3D lines representing different types of activities, but how would you then extract aggregate information, like summary statistics, from these types of networks? So I think there's some folks who are engaged by your framework, but wondering how does that get visualized?
Okay, I will take on this question first, and then Dan can follow up. So in terms of the different kinds of relations, in fact, Don Jenner at UC Santa Barbara several decades ago already wrote articles about human extensibility. And also Maple Kwan and other people use this concept and time geography concepts and the GIS to implement these kind of concepts. So there are different ways to represent or create GIS databases for managing these kinds of relations, okay? So relations, for example, in terms of data model, very much, it can be thought as a matrix, okay? Then in terms of the visualization part, simply, if you have many space-time pairs, it can be too crowded to display on your screen. And, several people in the GIS community also have worked on how can we better represent like these kind of connections and flows in GIS. So there are different ways of doing it. And, okay, Dan, do you want to add something on this part?
Sure. I think my approach would be, sorry, I needed this. I think it will be contingent upon the context and the specific application context. So our framework is tries to create a holistic, synergistic representation as we are moving as a human dynamics or human activities are being conducted through this hybrid mode, as all of us have experienced during the pandemic. But in the context of that question, in terms of visualization, I think it's going to be a specific context and application depending on your goal. Like if you are trying to get from A to B in the physical place, I think you have to rely on the traditional geospatial space, the coordinates to help you to navigate. However, if you are trying to understand the social the connection, who is connected to whom for some of the business deals and transactions, I think knowing the visualizing things in the absolute space may not that be helpful. You have to think about in terms of the social network and all the relational space that would probably bring you closer to the what you are trying to resolve.
Yeah, and also in terms of the second part of the question, how can we go from disaggregate to aggregate patterns? So that's a very good question. Depends on, again, what kinds of space concepts and place concepts we are dealing with. For example, if it's in absolute space, and it is possible to use, for example, methods as simple as kernel density estimation, okay, to aggregate the locations of the different individuals' movements over time to show the changing distribution patterns, for example. But for example, if it's in relational space, then we probably will use other methods to aggregate them. So, multidimensional scaling and all kinds of the different methods. So I think, there are the different methods out there already, which can help us deal with the situations when we need to aggregate from the individual level to the aggregate level. Then?
Yeah. Do you want to keep on stay on this topic or try to answer some other questions?
I think we should answer another question or two. Yeah. One question that came up a few times, and forgive me for leaving my role as moderator, but I'm going to put something I wrote on this in the chat. But there were some questions about data backing up the idea that technological advices are affecting our own senses of space, location, and navigation. And again, forgive me but I'm going to put it in the chat because I have that really frustrating academic answer, which is yes, but there's more to the story. But it got asked a few different times, so I'd love to hear both of your 2 cents on what's going on with respect to navigation, sense of place, perceptual as moderated by the devices that we use.
Do you want to?
Yeah, okay. I think this also could be tied to the quantum term that Dan discussed. So, in terms of the traditional positivist approach, we probably think we can observe everything objectively and collect data and carry out analysis. But, in this case, in this framework, I think we need to go beyond that, just like what quantum term suggests, because it's holistic. For example, in terms of mental space, sometimes we can use the VGI approach, okay? Instead of we try to identify people's perception, we can actually have people themselves report their feelings, their perceptions, okay? For example, how they perceive Chinatown in New York City, etc.
Yeah, I'm glad that this question popped up because last week I took my class to visit the VTTI's Smart Road. They are doing testing for the autonomous trucks and the vehicles for all the 3 automakers. One of the questions popped up was actually related to this in terms of how soon those driverless cars will be on the road. And believe it or not, the main motivations for the automakers to produce driverless cars is because we humans tended to make too many mistakes in driving. So if you turn it over to all these algorithms, automated them, we could eliminate lots of the fatal car crashes. But of course, from a sociological perspective, too much reliant on technology will definitely amputate our cognitive abilities, diminish, our diminish our navigation skills, and it will be human cognitive capabilities have always evolved with the evolution of a technology. So how human navigation skills or space sense of space or geospatial perception of the environment will change with this pervasive use of new technology. I don't know, but definitely it will change. Is it for better or worse? I think it is definitely something worse of future studies.
So just real quick, one thing that I found when I was looking into this topic was the way in which the folks who were eschewing navigational technologies in their own lives were the ones who were already better navigators, and those who were really relying on navigational devices in their own lives were the ones who had the most challenges navigating. So it ended up being these two feedback loops, right? Where the best navigators did better and the worst navigators relying on the technologies ended up not being able to further their skill sets. But, I think there's something to be said about the fact that, people come into the table with different degrees of navigational abilities. And, for some people having those devices is a bigger crutch than I don't want to say crutch, but it plays a bigger role in their lives than for other people. Okay, I'm the moderator. I'm not supposed to be talking. I think there's a really fun, final question here. So I think I'll read it, most of it out loud. Place identity is largely dependent on the perception and the imagination of space, on how people signify space, that is, our sense of place. How and why do you distinguish between place in relational and mental space? I think that's a fascinating question.
Yeah, excellent question.
Well, I'm glad I'm not a pinterest.
Yeah, this is excellent question. So, for example, the example I use in my presentation, how do we represent Google? Okay, so Google could have multiple place identities or multiple individual identities. So yes, place identity to some degrees also is related to the mental space. And that is also why we have that outer circle to connect those 4 different concepts of space and the 4 different concepts of place together, because they are not independent from each other. They are always associated with each other. And in fact, again, to make connection between my talk and Dan's talk, that's also tied to the concepts of quantum term. Because of these different kinds of concepts, they are actually entangled together. Okay, so if we treat them as individual silos, then probably it will be very hard to really tackle these challenges. So I'm sure Dan has more to say about this.
Yeah, that's absolutely related to the quantum term, because at the very fundamental level, the quantum theory is trying to think about holistically between the objectivity and the subjectivity. In other words, to link the observer with the observed, and that's what we are trying to do in this framework, and moving forward. I think that's what the most fascinating part about the metaverse. You know, all these objective data we are creating through the various devices, machinery, but also this growing perception, you know, that are generated through the social media, the live logging, and the human perception. And how do you meaningfully synthesize, by the way, all this human generated perception, including misinformation. Some are reflecting the reality, what's going on in the real world. Some are reflecting more how we think, approach the world. How do we meaningfully integrate, you know, those variety of information in order to create purpose and the meaning, you know, for human? I think that will be the real challenge as we move forward.
I like that, the idea of creating meaning. Well, out of respect for everyone's time, thank you, Dr. Shah, Dr. Sui, and thank you to everyone who asked questions. I apologize we didn't get to have time to answer all of them. I encourage you to engage with the presenters and the person next to you and everyone on these ideas. And once we post the talk, it has been recorded. Once we post it, we'll send out an announcement so that everyone can access it as desired and as needed.
Jen, can you save the questions so that we can follow up with those
I will
afterwards?
I will save them and send them to you for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in. I'm looking forward to meeting you all in person soon.
Take care.